The coalition has today finally decided to oppose Labor's misinformation laws. The Albanese government's legislation would fine social media giants millions of dollars if they don't remove so-called misinformation from their platforms. These are dangerous proposed laws that further empower and enforce censorship of all individuals on social media. They are Orwellian-style laws that give a government entity the power to control free speech and to censor content that they deem to be misleading or harmful. Shadow Communications Minister David Coleman will be on the show live tonight to speak about this. These are laws Anthony Albanese seems to have copied from his political ally Joe Biden in the United States. Joe Biden announced a governance board to fight the spread of disinformation, claiming it was a national security issue.
Become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country.
How are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
It's a terrible idea. It communicates to the world that we're going to be spreading propaganda within our country.
You may recall that Nina Jankovic was tapped to head this Department of Homeland Security's disinformation board. But then it was revealed that she had an extensive history of pushing the debunked Trump-Russia collusion claims that ended up being misinformation.
She has, for starters, consistently misinformed the public about the Hunter Biden laptop story and spread the lie that it was Russian propaganda. She has consistently spread false and misleading claims about the Steele dossier, which we now know was actually itself a piece of Russian propaganda. At every turn, Mr. Secretary, she has used social media and the public to launder propaganda herself. Here's my question to you. If your intent was to combat misinformation online or in the government, why on God's green earth would you nominate someone who is a human geyser of misinformation?
Well, as you know, this censorship has already happened with COVID mandates and vaccines, the Hunter Biden laptop, and the origins of the COVID virus. But these new Albanese laws could apply to individuals as well. Any Australian could be hauled before ACMA to account for what ACMA decides is misinformation. And if you don't show up, you could be charged $8,000 a day. $8,000 a day. And if you think this is insane, if you think this would never happen, well, remember Zoe Bueller, who came on my show just a few weeks ago. She spoke about how she was arrested while pregnant for just posting on Facebook about plans to protest Victoria's lockdowns.
It was terrifying. These, I think there was about 6 of them were suddenly right throughout my house. You know, my children were down in the living area playing. I was a shaking mess. A lot of people don't know I actually spent the next day in hospital with I was experiencing a possible miscarriage.
So just to explain here, if someone is accused of misinformation, and just 2 years ago, this would have been for posting about a laboratory-created virus or Hunter Biden's laptop or questioning vaccines, then according to the Albanese government's new laws, you'd be fined $8,000 a day if you don't comply with the notice to appear before the government body ACMA. Is this a democracy? Or are these laws more at home in an authoritarian regime like the communist dictatorship of China or Russia or North Korea? You know the answer to that. This is absurd, extreme, heavy-handed, and quite simply the worst idea this government has had. This could suppress free speech and extinguish alternative points of view that are fundamental for our democracy. I don't want to labour the point about Wuhan, but Facebook literally censored any suggestion the virus may have been engineered in a Wuhan laboratory from its entire platform, when in fact a group of leading scientists who authored the Proximal Origins paper thought that that's exactly what might have happened. Scientist Ian Lipkin said COVID-19 may have been released after adaptation through selection in culture in a lab in Wuhan. He wrote in an email, "It does not eliminate the possibility of inadvertent release following adaptation through selection in culture at the Institute in Wuhan." And another scientist, Robert Gary, wrote in February 2020, "Accidental release is a scenario many will not be comfortable with, but it would be impossible to dismiss the possibility out of hand." But to say this publicly, if you or I said this publicly, it was misinformation and Facebook would have removed it. And if Albanese's new laws were in place at the time, well, you could then be called to appear before ACMA, and if you didn't show up, well, an $8,000 fine every single day until you did. As I said, David Coleman will be on my show tonight to speak about this. And by the way, leading US scientist Richard Ebright from Rutgers University says that the United States academics who downplayed the idea that COVID leaked from a lab, despite their personal doubts, could face criminal prosecution or fraud. He gave an interview to Adam Crichton at The Australian just today, and he said that the arguments over COVID's origin is moving from the scientific community to the congressional arena and will ultimately end up in the judicial arena. Here's what he said. He said there will be referrals for prosecution of violations of law, including, based on what we know already, very clear evidence for criminal fraud, for criminal conspiracy to defraud, or criminal misuse of federal funds. And we'll see whether or not he's right, whether that eventuates, we don't know. Ebright also spoke about the audio from an ABC journalist caught in the hot mic moment that I played you last night on this show. And this, of course, is where the ABC's foreign affairs reporter in Canberra, Stephen Jedgets, admitted that he had dismissed the lab leak theory when he shouldn't have, and he also called me a pitbull and unhinged. And if you missed it, here's that audio.
I feel like I remember being super dismissive of that very early, not even very early on, for a good while. I was like, that is just the most unhinged thing ever. And I reckon I was overly influenced by the fact that there were some truly nasty and crazy people who were already deep down the rabbit hole. I probably didn't look at it dispassionately enough.
Well, today, quite a few prominent figures in the United States have commented on this astonishing revelation that an ABC journalist didn't pursue the story for apparent ideological reasons. World Health Organization expert former advisory group member Jamie Metzl, and he also served on the National Security Council for the Clinton administration. So he's a Democrat. He said, "These Australian journalists caught on a hot mic verbalise what every journalist who erroneously described a scientific consensus supporting a COVID natural origin and summarily dismissed the research-related origin hypothesis should now feel. They got the story 100% wrong. Every one of them should be scrambling to amend or retract their indefensible previous work." Very strong comments there. As I said, Jamie Metzl, former National Security Council for the Clintons. Rutgers University's Richard Ebright replied to his tweet to say, "Complicit cretins will be complicit cretins, and in most cases lack the mental and moral wherewithal to correct their errors." And then Richard told Adam Crichton in that article today that listening to them, so he heard the audio, listening to them, it is just clear how dismissive they are and how difficult it is for them to acknowledge that they were the gullible ones, not she. And he's referring to me there. And by the way, they still haven't apologised. And high-profile American investor Kyle Bass also weighed in. He said, "The people caught out on the hot mic didn't take the time to read Sharri's book, where Sharri carefully and thoughtfully interviewed hundreds of virologists, epidemiologists, intelligence officials, national security officials in an effort to investigate the real origin of COVID." But back to the laws. If you think about it this way, a lab leak was accused of being misinformation or a conspiracy. And now we know it was those who claimed it was misinformation who are, in fact, guilty of misinformation. US Senator Rand Paul, who we had on the show recently, has now referred Anthony Fauci to the Department of Justice for prosecution because he lied to Congress. Fauci insisted his agency had not funded risky gain-of-function research in Wuhan, a claim that just isn't true. And the release of emails subpoenaed by the US Congress shows that Fauci knew it wasn't true as well. He was emailing his deputy urgently about this very topic on the night of January the 31st, 2020. But the truth always emerges in the end. And right now, the cover-ups and webs of deceit from scientists and government officials are being exposed. As Fauci is referred to the DOJ, you can only shake your head at these lies over his agency's funding of risky gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Something that was misinformation just 2 years ago.
Do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. You do not know what you are talking about.
But now we have contemporaneous documents from February 2020, in the height of the beginning of the pandemic, where he's saying privately, well, yes, we're suspicious that this virus could have come from the lab because they're doing gain-of-function research. And he describes the project that I had described to him a year later, which he said, oh, there's nothing to see here. This is not gain-of-function. But now we have, in his own words, admitting that it was gain-of-function, admitting they funded it, and admitting that it gave them suspicion to the possibility that this pandemic actually came from the lab.